special report. Here's Tom Yamas.
And good day. We are coming on the air with breaking news. Just moments ago, NBC News has obtained a copy of the warrant used to carry out this week's FBI search of former President Donald Trump's Florida home. That warrant, issued by the Justice Department, provides a detailed explanation of exactly what they were looking for. I want to get right to NBC's Justice and Intelligence correspondent, Ken Delaney. And Ken, you're one of the few people at NBC News who's actually seen this document. It is going to post later, but I understand you've obtained it through your sources. What is it telling us?
Tom, it's telling us that the FBI says that they seized 11 sets of classified documents from the former president's Florida home at Mar-a-Lago from among 20 boxes of items, some of which it's not clear whether they're classified or not. And very few of these items are actually labeled in a way that people can understand what they mean, but some are. And one is an executive grant of clemency for Roger Jason Stone Jr., and another is listed as information regarding the president of France. And then in terms of the documents that are labeled classified, and this is from the receipt of property, the list of things that the FBI said they took, which is signed by a lawyer for Donald Trump and by an FBI special agent. Among the list of things they said they took was a designation of documents called various classified TS-SCI documents. That stands for top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. That's a very high level of classification beyond top secret. What it refers to is information that's so secret that you can only see it if you have a need to know within the U.S. government. And then the FBI says they took 4 sets of top secret documents, 3 sets of secret documents, and 3 sets of confidential documents. There's also an attachment, Tom, that explains, it's part of the warrant that explains what the FBI told the judge they were seeking before they got there. And this has some very interesting language in it, because it says that the FBI was seeking any physical documents with classification markings, along with any containers or boxes in which such documents are located. It also asked for information, including communications in any form, regarding the retrieval, storage, or transmission of national defense information or classified material, any government or presidential records created between January 2017 and January 20th, 2021, or any evidence of the knowing alteration, destruction, or concealment of any government or presidential records or any documents with classification markings. And lastly, Tom, there's another attachment in which the FBI describes the areas of the property where it will search and where it won't search. It talks about how Mar-a-Lago is a mansion with approximately 58 bedrooms and 33 bathrooms on a 17-acre estate. And the FBI says that they were going to search an area called the 45 office, all storage rooms, and all other rooms or areas within the premises used or available to be used by F. POTUS, the former president of the United States, and his staff, in which boxes or documents could be stored, including all structures or buildings on the estate. And the FBI went on to say they would not search, for example, rooms used by third parties such as Mar-a-Lago members and rooms otherwise not used by the former president. So it was a targeted search. They seized classified documents. They seized documents labeled regarding the president of France. And what's not in here, Tom, is any reference to nuclear material or any label of any kind that describes what these classified materials are. And that would make sense, because the FBI is not going to specifically lay out the nature of classified documents.
And Ken, the reason why you say that is because there's a Washington Post report saying that some of these documents could be connected to nuclear issues, and that was some of the major reporting coming out of the Washington Post earlier today. You know, Ken, as you were reading through this, and I understand you've only had a short amount of time to kind of glance through everything, and it's pretty detailed from what you've had so far. It sounds like there was a vast set of documents they were trying to get, but I think it's important for us to explain to the viewers that these documents were not the property of Donald Trump. They were the property of the United States government, correct?
Well, that is certainly the theory of the prosecution and the theory of the FBI and the circumstances under which they seize these documents. I think the Trump team is arguing something different. They are arguing that the president had inherent declassification authority and was free to take any document he wanted from the Oval Office or the White House as long as he said it was declassified. We've spoken to historians and scholars about that, and they don't see much evidence for that point of view in the law. I mean, the president can declassify anything, but there has to be a record of it. We're told there's a process and procedure, and particularly when it comes to highly classified documents, there's no precedent for a president taking these kinds kinds of documents home. There are methods to store these kinds of documents. Former presidents who've written memoirs, for example, have had to go to secure facilities to look at classified documents. So you're absolutely right. According to the Justice Department and the FBI, these documents are the property of the U.S. government.
And I guess the big headline out of all of this right now is that it is clear right now that the documents that the FBI obtained from Mar-a-Lago were indeed, lots of them, both classified and top secret documents.
That's right. Not only top secret, but even a designation higher than top secret. Sensitive, compartmented information. That refers to some of the most secret documents in the government, Tom.
All right, Ken, I want you to stand by for us for a moment here. I want to go to David Loftman. He's the former chief of the Counterintelligence and Export Control Section of the Department of Justice National Security Division. If you can, please kind of walk us through. You heard Ken's reporting there. What stood out to you?
Well, Ken is reporting on the types of documents that the government is looking for as referenced in the warrant, and we can match that up with the reporting about what was actually retrieved, as the Wall Street Journal reported. What jumps out to me immediately, what I was looking for was the references on the warrant to what statutes, the violation of which were the foundation for the seeking this warrant, for the request to issue the warrant on a finding of probable cause that crimes have been committed and that evidence of those crimes would be found at Mar-a-Lago. And to my, somewhat shock, although maybe we shouldn't be shocked anymore, among the statutes cited is 18 U.S.C. 18 is Title 18, which is the Criminal Code of the United States, Section 793, which comprises the Espionage Act and includes sections that I used to use to prosecute people who, retained unlawfully and disclosed unlawfully classified information defined as information relating to the national defense. It's the most sensitive kind of information at issue. And that was one of the violations that undergirds this warrant. They also cited statutes having to do with the concealment and obstruction of information. So it's a pretty powerful statutory foundation for this search warrant, and it's just really shocking to see it associated with a search warrant directed at a former president of the United States. And it underscores the alarm bells that went off at the department when they came to realize that the former president and his representatives were not being candid with them about having produced to the National Archives all of the classified information at Mar-a-Lago.
David, I do want to go back, and I know this is your area of expertise, but a little bit of when you started was a bit technical, and I want to make sure we're walking our viewers through this. I want you to go back to that espionage part. Essentially, these documents could be documents foreign governments would want to get their hands on, or other nefarious bodies, possibly?
Well, look, I'm not accusing the President of the United States of engaging in espionage. This is a statute that goes back to around 1917, but only some of its provisions relate to actual espionage. Others relate to the unlawful possession or retention of classified information whose disclosure could redound to the benefit of our adversaries or the detriment to the United States. But these are highly technical statutes. They are charged. 18 U.S.C. 793 is charged in the most serious kinds of cases involving the mishandling of classified information. So again, it just underscores the seriousness of what the government already learned and what it expected to find. And David,
that's where I was going to with the question. Apologies if you didn't understand that. But essentially, there is no doubt in the FBI's mind, in the Justice Department's minds, that these documents were at the highest levels when we talk about secrecy, when it comes to both espionage, the secrets of the United States, how we deal with other governments. It could be a variety of things, but ultimately they were incredibly sensitive.
Well, we have learned through reporting that documents, I think it's the Wall Street Journal, documents classified at the top secret level, which is the highest level of classification, which were in addition SCI, secret compartmented information, were among those sets of documents found and removed from Mar-a-Lago earlier this week. SCI is a compartment. It's not a classification level, but it signifies that among the most sensitive type of sources and methods of intelligence collection were used to gather the intelligence comprising that document, that report. Oftentimes it is signals-related intelligence, electronic surveillance that the National Security Agency may engage in, for example. It could also sometimes involve human source reporting. These are documents that typically have brightly colored cover sheets that have to remain in a secure compartmented facility that only people with special credentials can access. These are not documents intended to be residing at someone's private beach resort.
Yeah, near a pool house. Okay, David, we appreciate your analysis there. I do want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Kristen Welker. Now, Kristen, I know you've been listening to all the reporting from Ken and some of the analysis here. President Biden has been very careful to comment on this. Most of the comments, of course, have come from the Justice Department. Do we know if the White House has been aware of this and they've seen these documents as well? Is there any comment coming? And, of course, there's the big political question in this, right? There was a risk by the Justice Department to go in there because already Republicans and defenders of the former president said the Justice Department really went out of bounds here and going into Mar-a-Lago and trying to obtain these documents once again.
Well, great point, Tom. To your first question, we haven't heard from President Biden yet or the White House yet about the release of this search warrant, but I can tell you that they have not been commenting. And in fact, they have been going to great lengths to try to distance themselves from this process, from the search that unfolded at Mar-a-Lago on Monday. We have pressed the press secretary repeatedly about this, other top officials here within the administration, and they are just saying that they will not comment on an ongoing investigation. And that's really a part of the broader strategy here by the president to fulfill that campaign promise not to engage in the actions of the Justice Department and that show that it is independent from the White House. So as a political matter, that is the strategy from this president and from this White House. At the same time, you talk about the broader political implications of all of this, Tom, and I think there are a few. On the one hand, if you talk to Republicans, both Trump supporters and detractors, they will tell you that this is a moment where, to some extent, some Republicans have been galvanized around former President Trump, who has continued to lash out at the investigation, at the Justice Department, at the FBI, accusing them of overreach, and that has to some extent galvanized some Republicans around the former president, including those who left him and stopped supporting him in the wake of January 6th. I'm told some are now coming back into the fold. You're also seeing all of this unfold in a week that has seen some really big wins for Democrats. Democrats poised to pass a major piece of legislation. In fact, just today, the president poised to take a victory lap to talk about all of this. And now, yet again, the oxygen being sucked up by his predecessor, someone who he may be facing again in 2024. So I think the political implications are quite significant. But when you talk about these documents, Tom, as a political matter and as a matter of national security, I've been talking to experts who say, look, it's really about that. While Americans might be sitting back and being confused about why is there such a robust fight and such a strong effort to retrieve these documents, it really comes down to that. They say this is a matter of national security. One more point I will make, Tom. You saw this extraordinary statement from the Attorney General on Thursday coming out. It was 2 minutes, but it was a very strong and forceful defense of the decision to go in and search Mar-a-Lago for these documents, some of them classified, as Ken has been reporting at the top, as you have been talking about, and also a defense of the law enforcement officials who carried this out. It comes against increased attacks against them because as the president has stepped up his attacks, we have seen other attacks online. And of course, you saw that attack against the FBI field office in Cincinnati. Now, we don't know exactly what the motive was there, but we do know that that is someone who's been active on former President Trump's social media site. And so all of those threats are things that are concerning not only the Attorney General as he laid out yesterday, but I've been talking to a number of law enforcement officials who say this is a very tense moment. They're very concerned about that stepped up rhetoric. And again, really underscoring how important they believe it was for the Attorney General to get out in front of it, to make that 2-minute statement where they believe he said quite a lot and delivered that robust defense of their actions on Monday, Tom.
All right, Kristen Welker for us from the White House. Kristen, we want to thank you for that. I want to go to NBC's Ron Allen, who's at Mr. Trump's Florida residence in Mar-a-Lago, just outside there, I should mention. Ron, I understand you have some reaction from the former president?
Yes, the former president has certainly been trying to take advantage of this moment. As soon as the reports were surfacing about what was in the documents from the Wall Street Journal and then from NBC News, former President Trump released a statement saying in part that, number one, it was all declassified, and number two, they didn't have to, quote, seize anything. They could have had it any time they wanted to without playing politics and breaking into Mar-a-Lago. Of course, we know that there was a subpoena issued some time ago that Mr. Trump apparently did not comply with. He says all they had to do was ask. He says the bigger problem is what are they going to do with the 33 million pages of documents, many of which are classified, that President Obama took to Chicago, something that he has raised on a number of occasions in previous days. Interestingly, today, the National Archives and Records Administration released a statement saying that it is in control of President Obama's classified and unclassified documents. They say that there are the 30 million documents that former President Trump is talking about are in a government facility in Chicago that they have control of, and the classified documents are also in a secured facility in Washington, to rebut former President Trump's statements about that. Beyond that, the president's spokesman issued a statement saying that the Biden administration is in obvious damage control. They call it a botched raid. They talk about the fact that there was a handwritten note and picture book seized, trying to sarcastically allude to some of the items that were listed in the various documents, and they say this is outrageous, that this is being directed, the weaponization of the government, a phrase that the former president has used in recent days. Beyond that, on his social media feed, he has also been talking about his victories, candidates that he has endorsed in the primary season who have been victorious, and his poll numbers, something that, of course, former President Trump often likes to talk about. So clearly, he is trying to get political advantage from this moment, while at the same time attacking the Biden administration and attacking the Justice Department and the FBI for doing this all in the first place.
All right, Ron, we appreciate that. On that reporting, I do want to bring in David Loftman once again. David, walk our viewers through this. The president does have the power to declassify any documents he wants, but there is a process for that, correct?
Well, yes and no. Yes, the president is the supreme original classification authority and has inherent constitutional powers, if not statutorily derived powers, to declassify information. But there are no executive orders or statutes or regulations that prescribe the mechanism by which a president of the United States should do that. There are executive orders that address how subordinate officials, up to I think the vice president, can declassify materials, but it's a very fixed, prescribed procedure. And I would imagine, of course, this is just a search warrant as to which the government had to establish only probable cause as grounds for a search. This is not a charging document. It remains to be seen whether the Department of Justice would exercise its prosecutorial discretion to charge Mr. Trump or any of his representatives with a crime, in which case they'd have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed a crime. But I would expect that the department has already closely considered and will continue to evaluate the adequacy of a defense that Mr. Trump almost certainly would make, which he's making through his public relations representatives now, that he automatically can declassify things, or just by thinking it or saying it to some aide who scribbles it on a cocktail napkin that's halfway flushed down the toilet, that he has declassified something. There has to be some sort of formalization accompanying a decision as important, as momentous as declassifying intelligence collection information. And perhaps the government has undertaken witness interviews of former White House people to former White House aides to learn more about whether Mr. Trump ever engaged in any kind of actual process to declassify information. My guess is he hasn't. But this would be a case of first impression, an issue of first impression, if the case were charged, if it were therefore litigated, because no court has ever addressed the means by which a president of the United States must declassify information. One thing I think should be determined by a judge is that it doesn't happen just in the president's head. It doesn't happen just because the president is walking around possessing this declassification authority, or even if he barks at an aide to do it. There has to be actual formal official action to do it, and it ought to be memorialized in writing.
There has to be some process. You used to work at the Justice Department, so I'd like to ask you, I know you're not there right now, but I'd like to ask you, do you think the Attorney General and the FBI would go to the unprecedented step of going into Mar-a-Lago, seizing back these documents, bringing them back to Washington, if they didn't think there was more of a case, or do you think it could possibly just end here for the former president?
Well, we'll have to see what, additional evidence they have obtained or will continue to obtain that would potentially support criminal charges. We don't have visibility into that. What is clear is that they had an abundance of probable cause to seek this search, that their narrative representations, factual representations to the magistrate judge in Florida were completely borne out by what was retrieved from Mar-a-Lago, because what has been reported is that boxes of classified information, classified as high as top secret SCI, were retrieved. That's exactly what they were concerned about. So they have more than borne out the basis for the search warrant. Now it remains to be seen what else they have learned through other investigative steps, what more they will learn, whether they believe the evidence is sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction if they were to charge. That's the standard set forth in Department of Justice enforcement policy for any prosecutor to criminally charge somebody with a crime. And of course, they'll have to take into account what kind of litigation risk they would have to face if they criminally charge Mr. Trump or someone close to him. What kinds of defenses could be raised? What types of legal arguments, like what would be considered a motion to dismiss an indictment, for example, on the grounds that the president possessed and exercised this declassification authority. So they have to consider all these things. These are very careful lawyers. The Attorney General is a former federal judge. They're going to proceed with meticulous care to ensure that they are complying with the rule of law, that they have taken on board what judicial precedent there is that would be brought to bear in evaluating their legal arguments if they are litigating charges down the road. And we're just going to have to wait to see what happens next.
David, I know you don't want to speculate too much, but I know a lot of people are going to sort of hone in on the president of France and documents related to the president of France. What kind of information could there be there? And generally speaking, that the FBI and the Department of Justice would want back and the National Archives would want back?
Well, I don't know what the nature of a classified document regarding conversations with the president of France could be if they were discussing defense policy or foreign policy affairs or intelligence cooperation. It's not President Macron's favorite recipe for cassoulet. It's something, of a nature that would require classification. So, presumably it would have to do with the topic area that would be in the national defense or foreign affairs realm.
David, we appreciate your analysis. I want to go back to Ken Delaney. And Ken, as we've covered the president, when he was the president, before he was even president, Donald Trump has never been on the same page with anybody that's investigating him. But on the unsealing of this search warrant, both he and the Justice Department were both okay with this being made completely public.
That's right, Tom, and it's a bit of a formality now, but we've just moments ago seen a filing by the Justice Department that explains that tells the magistrate judge in this case, Bruce Reinhart down in Florida, that both parties agree to support the Justice Department's motion to unseal this warrant and this receipt document. And interestingly, the document is signed by Jay Bratt, who's the Justice Department's chief of the Counterintelligence and Export Control Section. And he is the official who we believe was down in Mar-a-Lago negotiating with Trump lawyers back in June. And he's a pretty high-level official at the Justice Department in charge of national security matters. So it just underscores the importance with which the Justice Department is in the momentousness with which the DOJ is approaching this case, Tom.
Yeah, I want to bring in Frank Figluzzi. He's the former assistant director for counterintelligence and the FBI. He's also an NBC News security analyst. He joins us by phone now. Frank, I have to ask you, having worked in this area, if you were on the other end of a phone call knowing that a former president had top secret classified documents underneath his pool house, what would you have thought?
Well, this is cringeworthy in terms of the potential damage to national security. And, one of the thoughts that runs through my head is why now? And it really, while this is conjecture, it's been over a year that this sensitive information has been in a place it should never have been. And so that points toward specificity of timing, that something triggered this about, hey, we know where this is and we now know what it might be. And I think that's what prompted the move now. What jumps out at me reading the warrant is that there are 3 statutes listed as potentially being violated. And they didn't have to list 3. They could have listed 1 or 2, but they've listed 3. And what jumps out at me is that the first statute listed, Title 18, 793, is an espionage statute. That is amongst the most serious crimes you can be charged with in the United States government. So elements of that statute involve not only possessing unlawfully national defense information, but there's a possibility within the provisions of that statute that you're transmitting it. So they can't, it appears to me that they can't yet rule out the possibility of espionage. And then another statute they've listed, Title 18, 2071, would actually, if he's convicted of it, if someone is convicted of it, would preclude that person from holding future office. So they went ahead and listed 3 significant statutes. They did it because they apparently cannot rule out the most serious crimes in our government.
Frank, I got to ask you, for these documents to be labeled classified, top secret, sensitive, compartmented information, is there any chance that these documents aren't that important, or just to get that classification to be stamped top secret, classified, it has to be of the utmost importance? Basically, what I'm getting at is there any chance here the president thought these documents weren't that important?
No, when you're at the level now, and we've got confirmation. First, we had the Washington Post reporting. Now we have confirmation and seeing what's called the return, or some people call the receipt of what the FBI took from the search, and we see confirmation that there is top secret documents amongst this. In the Washington Post reporting, there may be compartmented top secret. You need to understand that is the most sensitive information in the U.S. government, that it often involves singular sources and methods, that the definition of top secret means that which, if compromised, could potentially cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. That's the language, exceptionally grave damage. And when you're talking about compartmented top secret, it means a very limited number of people are even allowed to get read in and read out, and they must have a need to know at that time. So there's no way to look at this and say that this is inconsequential information.
Frank, we appreciate that. I do want to go back to Kristen Welker, who covered President Trump when he was there in the White House. And Kristen, I know you have some more about the president's thinking in wanting this search warrant to be released, because as we're getting more and more information, you do have to ask yourself why the president, who at times ran on his national security record, would want people to know that he had documents that were sensitive to national security at his pool house in Mar-a-Lago.
Well, that's right. And on Monday, when this search occurred, you'll recall that the former president essentially called on the Justice Department, the Attorney General, to release the documents. And what we saw was the Attorney General basically calling the bluff of the former president. So I am told, based on my conversations with those close to the former president, that he was huddling, had phone calls with his team of legal experts, attorneys overnight, and they weighed the pros and cons of trying to block this from being released. And ultimately, Tom, they decided that this was, politically speaking at least, the more on its face transparent move, given that he had called on the Justice Department to initially release these documents. And so at that point, to some extent, the former president was a bit boxed in. But that is why essentially we got that statement, that extraordinary statement, just before midnight last night. The former president saying release the documents now. He's also, of course, called this a witch hunt, something that he used quite a lot as an attack line when he was here at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. To the question of why now, why did this search happen now, Tom? I heard you talking about that. You'll recall that the Justice Department issued a subpoena for these documents back in June. There was a big back and forth, meetings that occurred. Several boxes were turned over, about 15, and then based on our reporting, we are told from a source familiar with the matter that someone who is familiar with these content, essentially told law enforcement officials there are more boxes here. You didn't get everything that's here at Mar-a-Lago. And so that was one of the reasons that really prompted this search that we saw unfold on Monday. Again, this unprecedented search, Tom. And so this has been a week that has rocked Trump world and certainly his inner circle as they've tried to navigate the very complicated politics of all of this and logistics of all of this, Tom. And again, it remains an open question how this will impact the decision that he has yet to make, whether or not he's going to run again for office, Tom.
All right, Kristen Welker for us at the White House, where it sounds like they may be doing some construction there as you are reporting. All right, Kristen, I want to thank Kristen and Ken and our entire NBC News team covering this today. That concludes our coverage. We'll have much more tonight on NBC Nightly News. For all of us here at NBC News, I'm Tom Yamas. Thank you for watching.